67 million Americans received a Social Security check last month. Let that number sit with you for a moment. 67 million people, more than the entire population of France, who depend on that deposit hitting their bank account on the second, third, or fourth Wednesday of every month like clockwork. Retirees who worked 40 years in factories and offices and classrooms and hospitals. Widows who lost their husbands and have no other income. Disabled veterans who cannot work. Children who lost a parent and have no other safety net. People who paid into this system for 30, 40, 50 years of their working lives, who had 6.2% of every single paycheck taken out before they ever saw a dime of it and were promised, were guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States government that the money would be there when they needed it. And I am about to show you with numbers sourced directly from the Social Security Administration's own trustees, from the Congressional Budget Office, and from the agency's own chief actuary that the United States government is 6 years away from not being able to keep that promise. Not 20 years. Not 50 years. 6. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which is the fund that pays retirement and survivor benefits to the vast majority of those 67 million people, is now projected to be completely exhausted by the end of fiscal year 2032. And when I say exhausted, I mean empty. Zero. The money that was supposed to be there, the surplus that was built up over decades of workers paying more in than retirees took out, will be gone. And when that happens, every single beneficiary in the program, every retired teacher, every widowed grandmother, every disabled worker will face an immediate, automatic, across-the-board benefit cut that the Congressional Budget Office now estimates at 28%. Not 10%, not 15%. 28% slashed from your check overnight with no vote, no debate, no warning letter, and no appeal process, because there is no legal mechanism in place to determine how benefits get reduced when the trust fund runs dry. Nobody wrote that part of the law, and Congress has done absolutely nothing to fix it. Let me put that 28% cut in real numbers so you understand what it means for actual human beings and not just a line item on a government spreadsheet. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 is approximately $1,976 per month. A 28% cut reduces that to about $1,423. That is $553 a month that vanishes from your life. That is $6,636 a year. For the roughly 40% of unmarried elderly Americans who depend on Social Security for 90% or more of their total income, that cut is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence delivered in slow motion. It means choosing between medication and food. It means losing your apartment because you can no longer make rent. It means sitting in a house without heat in January because the utility bill was $80 more than you could cover. And I want to be very clear about something. This is not a worst-case scenario. This is the baseline projection from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, published in February 2026. The CBO's illustrative scenario shows benefits being cut by 7% in 2032 and then by an average of 28% per year from 2033 to 2036. And the reason the cut gets worse over time is because Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. Once the trust fund is empty, the program can only pay out what it collects in payroll taxes each month, and the amount coming in is shrinking relative to the amount going out because the ratio of workers paying into the system to retirees drawing from it is collapsing in real time. Here is the math that nobody in Washington wants to explain to you honestly, because it would require them to admit that they have known about this for decades and chose to do nothing. In 1960, there were 5.1 workers paying into Social Security for every one person collecting benefits. The system was flush with cash. It was mathematically impossible for it to fail under those conditions. By 2000, that ratio had dropped to 3.4 workers per beneficiary. Today, in 2026, it stands at approximately 2.7 workers per beneficiary, and it is heading toward 2-to-1 within the next 15 years. When you have only 2 people paying in for every 1 person taking out, and the people taking out are living longer than at any point in human history, the math does not work. It has never worked. And every single trustee report since 2012 has said the same thing. The combined trust funds will be depleted between 2033 and 2035, at which point only about 75 to 81% of scheduled benefits can be paid. This is not new information. This is not a revelation, it is a countdown that has been running in plain sight for 14 consecutive years, while Congress held hearings, commissioned studies, published reports, gave speeches, ran campaigns on saving Social Security, and then did absolutely nothing to actually save it. In calendar year 2025, Social Security ran a cash flow deficit of $250 billion, meaning it paid out $250 billion more in benefits than it collected in payroll taxes. Over the next decade, from 2026 through 2035, the program will run a cumulative $3.6 trillion in cash flow deficits. $3.6 trillion. That is the gap between what was promised and what exists. And that gap is being filled by drawing down the trust fund, which is a finite pile of money that has an expiration date stamped on it in bold red letters that now reads 2032. What most people do not know is that two separate pieces of legislation signed in the last 2 years have actually accelerated the insolvency date, making the crisis arrive sooner than previously projected. The first was the Social Security Fairness Act, signed by President Biden on January 5, 2025, which repealed the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. Those provisions had reduced benefits for certain public sector employees who also received government pensions. Repealing them increased the number of people receiving full benefits and raised the total payout from the trust fund without adding any new revenue to compensate. The Social Security Administration's chief actuary updated the depletion estimate afterward, and it moved forward. The second piece of legislation was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed by President Trump in July 2025, which created a new senior deduction that reduces the amount of Social Security income subject to federal taxation for older Americans below a certain income threshold. That sounds like a tax break for seniors, and on the surface it is. But here is what they did not tell you. The revenue from taxing Social Security benefits gets credited back to the Social Security Trust Fund. When you reduce the taxes on those benefits, you reduce the revenue flowing into the trust fund. The CBO's February 2026 report explicitly cited the senior deduction as one of the 3 primary drivers that accelerated the insolvency date. So both political parties in consecutive years signed laws that made the Social Security crisis worse while simultaneously promising to protect the program. The OASI trust fund depletion date moved from the first quarter of 2033 to the fourth quarter of 2032, roughly 1 year earlier, and the projected benefit cut upon depletion increased from 23% to 28%. Both parties did this. Both parties made it worse, and neither party has introduced a comprehensive plan to fix it. Now let me tell you what is happening to the agency itself, because even before the trust fund runs out, the ability of the Social Security Administration to actually deliver your benefits is being systematically destroyed from the inside. In 2025, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, led by Elon Musk, initiated the largest staffing cut in the Social Security Administration's 90-year history. 7,000 employees were pushed out through a combination of buyouts, voluntary early retirements, forced reassignments, and the threat of mass layoffs. The agency's workforce dropped from approximately 57,000 to its lowest level since 1967, when it served 52 million fewer beneficiaries than it does today. A single SSA employee is now expected to serve 1,480 beneficiaries. That is 3 times the ratio from 1967. 2,000 of the employees who left came specifically from field offices, which are the primary point of contact for Americans who need help with their Social Security claims, their disability applications, their survivor benefits, and their payment issues. The acting commissioner, who had been protecting operations staff from the initial round of cuts, was forced out in February 2025 after she resisted giving DOGE teams access to sensitive agency data. Her replacement was a mid-level official who had previously been placed on administrative leave for assisting DOGE representatives. The agency's Office of Transformation, which had been modernizing digital services, was eliminated entirely. The Office of Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity was shut down. Regional offices were consolidated from 10 down to 4, and the commissioner now running the agency, Frank Bisignano, is simultaneously serving as the head of the Internal Revenue Service, meaning the person responsible for your Social Security benefits is doing the job part-time while also running the tax collection agency. The impact on the people who actually depend on Social Security has been catastrophic and immediate, and the stories coming out of SSA field offices and phone lines across the country sound like dispatches from a collapsing institution. Before the cuts, the average wait time to reach someone on the SSA's 800 number was about an hour, which was already unacceptable for a program that serves 67 million people. After the cuts, wait times surged past an hour and a half on average, with some callers reporting waits of 4, 5, and even 9 hours before reaching a human being. One woman in Oceanside, California, told a local news station that she called the 800 number and was on hold literally for 9 hours across 2 days. 4 hours the first day before giving up, and 5 hours the next day before finally reaching someone. The number of calls flooding into the agency skyrocketed from 6.5 million per month in November 2024 to 10.4 million per month in early 2025, driven by what advocates describe as confusion and fear created by the administration's constant announcements of cuts, closures, and policy changes. People were panicking. They were calling to make sure their benefits had not been cut, to verify their account still existed, to check whether their field office was closing, and the system buckled under the weight of their fear. Disability claimants, who were already waiting 8 months for an initial decision and 7 months for an initial appeal before the cuts, now face even longer delays with fewer staff to process their claims. There has been a 27% increase in appeals for disability insurance claims in the past year alone. And here is something that should make your blood boil. Even after someone is approved for benefits, it is now taking 2 to 3 months to actually get into pay status, meaning you are found eligible. You are told you will receive benefits, and then you wait another 60 to 90 days before a single dollar hits your bank account. That delay is unprecedented in the history of the program. A Social Security expert and attorney in Philadelphia reported that her office spends time calling Social Security offices on people's behalf, sometimes 15 times a day, trying to get through. 15 calls a day to the same government agency just to resolve a single case. The agency also stopped releasing monthly reports on many of its customer service metrics, including wait times, appointment delays, and processing timelines. They stopped telling you how badly they were performing because the numbers had become so terrible that publishing them would have been an admission of institutional failure. Meanwhile, the SSA's website has crashed multiple times in recent months. Some disability recipients received notices on their online accounts that their benefits had been terminated, only to be told later it was a mistake, a glitch, a system error. Imagine being a disabled American living on $1,400 a month, opening your account, and seeing a notice that your benefits have ended. The terror of that moment, even if it turns out to be an error, is something no American should ever have to experience from their own government. The COBOL programmers who maintain the agency's ancient mainframe computer system, which runs on code written in a programming language from the 1960s that is barely taught in universities anymore, are being pushed out with no plan for knowledge transfer. An attorney who works closely with the agency warned publicly that if the SSA loses significant numbers of COBOL programmers, the agency faces major exposure to system disruption, if not outright system collapse. The system that processes your Social Security check runs on 60-year-old code maintained by a shrinking handful of specialists that nobody is replacing, and once their knowledge walks out the door, it is gone forever. The demographic time bomb underneath all of this is something that almost nobody talks about in concrete terms, so let me lay it out for you with the kind of specificity that your congressman will never use because it would require him to tell you the truth. The baby boomer generation, which consists of approximately 73 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964, is in the middle of the largest wave of retirements in American history. Every single day, roughly 11,200 Americans turn 65. That is not a typo. 11,200 people per day crossing the threshold from worker and taxpayer into retiree and benefit recipient. That works out to about 4.1 million new retirees per year flooding into a system that was already underwater before they arrived, and they are living longer than any generation before them. Life expectancy at age 65 is now approximately 18 to 20 additional years, meaning the average person who retires at 65 will collect Social Security benefits for nearly 2 decades. Some will collect for 25 or 30 years. When Social Security was created in 1935, life expectancy at birth was 61 years. the retirement age was set at 65. The system was literally designed so that most people would die before they ever collected a single check. It was an insurance program built on the actuarial assumption that most policyholders would never file a claim. Today, people are living into their 80s and 90s, collecting benefits for 2 and 3 decades, and the system was never fundamentally redesigned to account for that reality. The 1983 amendments raised the retirement age from 65 to 67, which was a band-aid on a hemorrhage, and nothing of equivalent significance has been done since. On the other end of the demographic spectrum, the birth rate in the United States has been declining for years and has now reached levels that alarm every demographer who studies population economics. Young women are having fewer children than at any point in recorded American history. The total fertility rate has fallen below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman and shows no signs of recovering. The most recent National Survey of Family Growth shows a stark drop in expected births among women aged 15 through 24, which means the generation entering the workforce in 20 years will be significantly smaller than the one entering it today. Fewer births today means fewer workers in 20 years, which means fewer people paying payroll taxes into Social Security, which means the ratio of workers to retirees continues its relentless deterioration, which means the trust fund runs out even faster and the benefit cuts upon depletion become even more severe than what is currently projected. This is not a temporary fluctuation or a blip caused by a recession. This is a structural demographic shift that will define the fiscal reality of the United States for the rest of the century, and there is no policy, no incentive, no program that can reverse it in time to save the trust fund. And on top of declining birth rates, the Trump administration's immigration crackdown is making the problem measurably worse. Immigration in 2025 fell to 1.3 million people, down from 2.8 million in 2024, a decline of more than 50% in a single year. Immigrants, both legal and undocumented, are net contributors to the Social Security system because many of them pay payroll taxes through their entire working lives, but either never collect benefits or collect far less than they contributed. Reducing immigration reduces the inflow of revenue to the trust fund without reducing the outflow of benefits, which accelerates the depletion timeline. The Social Security actuaries specifically noted this in their revised projections, and the Motley Fool reported that the current anti-immigration stance, if maintained long-term, will speed up the timeline toward depletion and increase the size of benefit cuts once the money runs out. Restoring long-term financial stability to Social Security today, right now, in 2026, would require one of two options, neither of which any politician in Washington is willing to propose. Option 1 is an immediate 29% increase in the payroll tax, raising it from 12.4% to approximately 16%, split between employers and employees. That means your paycheck gets smaller starting tomorrow, and your employer's labor costs jump overnight. Option 2 is an immediate 22% across-the-board cut in benefits for everyone currently receiving them and everyone who will ever receive them. A 22% cut today, not in 2032. Today. Those are the numbers from the American Action Forum, a nonpartisan fiscal policy organization based on the trustees' own actuarial data. And here is the part that makes it worse. If Congress waits until the trust fund actually runs out in 2032, those numbers get even uglier. At that point, it would require a 34% payroll tax increase or a 26% benefit cut. The longer they wait, the more painful the fix becomes. Every year of delay narrows the options and increases the sacrifice required from ordinary Americans who had nothing to do with creating this mess. Social Security's total spending is projected to rise from $1.6 trillion in 2026 to over $2.7 trillion by 2036. As a share of GDP, it will grow from 5.2% to 5.9%. And over the full 75-year projection window, the program faces an actuarial imbalance of 3.82% of taxable payroll, which translates to tens of trillions of dollars in unfunded obligations that exist right now, today, as a liability on the books of the United States government that nobody has any plan to pay for. I need to tell you something about what happens legally when the trust fund reaches zero, because this is where the situation goes from bad to terrifying. There is a direct conflict between two federal laws that nobody has resolved. Under the Social Security Act, every beneficiary remains legally entitled to their full scheduled benefits even after the trust fund is depleted. You are owed 100% of what was promised to you. However, the Anti-Deficiency Act prohibits any government agency from spending money it does not have, so the SSA cannot legally pay you more than it collects in current tax revenue, but you are legally entitled to more than they can pay. Those two laws contradict each other, and Congress has never passed legislation to resolve the contradiction. It is unclear, according to the Congressional Research Service, what specific actions the SSA would even take if a trust fund became insolvent. They have never had to do it before. There is no playbook. There is no procedure. There is no manual sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere that says, here is how we handle the moment when 67 million Americans discover that their government cannot pay them what it owes them. One option that has been discussed is paying full benefits on a delayed schedule, meaning you get your full check, but it arrives weeks or months late. Another option is making timely but reduced payments, meaning your check arrives on time, but it is 28% smaller. Either way, beneficiaries would remain legally entitled to the full amount and could theoretically take legal action to claim the balance. Imagine tens of millions of elderly Americans suing the federal government simultaneously for benefits they were promised and paid into for their entire working lives. That is not a hypothetical. That is the legal reality waiting at the end of this countdown. The former Social Security Commissioner, Martin O'Malley, who ran the agency before the current administration took office, has been sounding the alarm in the most explicit terms imaginable. He testified before Congress in 2024 that by the end of fiscal year 2024, the SSA would be serving 7 million more beneficiaries with 7,000 fewer full-time staff than in 2015. He warned that the agency cannot keep doing more with less. And after the DOGE cuts, he went even further, telling reporters that at this rate, they will break it. And they will break it fast, and there will be an interruption of benefits. He used the word interruption. The former commissioner of the Social Security Administration, the man who ran the entire operation, is publicly stating that benefits could be interrupted because the agency is being destroyed from within. That is not a political opponent making a campaign accusation. That is the person who most recently sat in the chair and saw the internal systems and staffing levels and processing capacity with his own eyes, telling you that the machine is breaking. And the agency's own internal data confirms it. Processing times are up. Wait times are up. Appeals are up 27%. Dropped calls are surging. Staff who remain are being reassigned to roles they have no training in. Institutional knowledge is walking out the door and it is not coming back. The COBOL programmers are leaving. The policy experts are leaving. The regional supervisors are leaving. And the people replacing them are answering phones for the first time in their careers, trying to explain to a 78-year-old widow why her payment is late, while simultaneously learning how to navigate a computer system that runs on programming language from the 1960s. Here is what you need to do right now, and I am not saying this to scare you. I am saying this because nobody else in your life is going to tell you this clearly. If you are currently receiving Social Security, you need to create a financial buffer that can absorb a 20 to 28% reduction in your monthly benefits starting as early as 2032. That is 6 years away. For some of you watching this, that means cutting expenses now while you still have time to adjust gradually rather than being forced to slash your budget overnight when the cut arrives. For others, it means looking into whether you qualify for any supplemental programs at the state or local level. If you are between 50 and 62 and planning to claim Social Security in the next decade, you need to recalculate your retirement plan using a benefit amount that is 20 to 28% lower than what the SSA website currently shows you. Do not plan your retirement based on the number on your statement. That number assumes the trust fund does not run out, and it will. If you are under 50, you need to treat Social Security as a supplement to your retirement, not the foundation of it. Build savings, invest, create income streams that do not depend on a government check that may be smaller than promised by the time you need it. Everyone, regardless of age, should create a My Social Security account at ssa.gov and verify that your earnings record is accurate, because errors in your earnings history can reduce your benefits permanently, and with the current staffing levels at the SSA, getting an error corrected could take months or years. And if you have elderly parents or relatives who depend on Social Security for the majority of their income, have the conversation now about what the plan is if their check drops by a quarter. That is the conversation nobody wants to have, but the people who have it now, while there is still time to plan, will be in a fundamentally better position than those who are blindsided when the trust fund hits zero. Social Security is the most important financial program in American history. It has lifted more people out of poverty than any other government policy ever enacted. Before it existed, nearly half of all elderly Americans lived in poverty. Today, that number is about 10%, and Social Security is the primary reason. It is not a welfare program. It is an insurance program that every working American pays into with every paycheck for their entire career. It is a promise. And that promise is about to be broken in the most devastating way imaginable unless Congress acts in the next 6 years with a comprehensive reform package that no one has even begun to seriously negotiate. The national debt just surpassed $38 trillion for the first time in history. Mandatory spending, which includes Social Security and Medicare, already consumes over 14% of GDP and is projected to rise to 15% by 2036. The political incentives to kick this can down the road one more time are overwhelming because fixing Social Security requires either raising taxes or cutting benefits, and neither of those things wins elections. So every politician in every party in every cycle looks at the calendar, looks at the polling, and decides that the crisis can wait one more term, and then one more, and then one more. Until one day the calendar catches up, the trust fund hits zero, and 67 million Americans open their bank accounts to find a check that is 28% smaller than the one they got last month. That day is now less than 2,400 days away. And the clock is ticking. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this video shocked you the most. I read every single one. Subscribe and hit the bell because the follow-up to this video is going to cover what Congress could actually do to fix this and why they refuse to do it. Share this with everyone you know who collects Social Security or plans to someday because they deserve to know what is coming.